it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. The Journal of Carniano Scateo Blackwood. My name is Ricard Dunkelstein, and I have a hobby that's more interesting than most stamp and coin collectors. I'm a bit of an urban explorer. In today's day and age, when most of the world has been investigated and mapped out, I instead seek to explore the abandoned and forgotten. I reasoned that it was in these places where I could find the extraordinary. I enjoyed my forays into the disused and neglected portions of the city. I love nothing more than to spend a Saturday carefully moving through the decrepit and derelict buildings in the southern side. It was on one of these Saturday expeditions, this past year, that I first came across the journal, Canyon Stakeu Blackwood. I've been rummaging through an abandoned building on the industrial side of town when I discovered the journal. The first few floors were devoid of anything really interesting, but when I reached the 6th and uppermost floor, I found a soiled mattress and desk. Sitting on the desk was a fountain pen and a paper journal. I ignored the saccharine sweet smell that flooded my nostrils and pervaded the uppermost floor. I sat down on what was a squatter's mattress and began to read. Blackwood Journal Entry, July 28, 2011. My therapist, back when I had a therapist, suggested I write down all my emotions into a journal so I could go back and see how far I've come. Well, I guess that's true, but probably not in the aspect that she'd thought. She probably hoped that I'd find enough emotional catharsis that I might make a breakthrough of sorts. But unfortunately, she was wrong. I write and write, but nothing ever changes. Well, I guess I should give introductions. My name is Canyon Stakeu Blackwood. Don't ask me how drunk my parents were when they came up with that name. My father thought it sounded tough, and my mother was too doped up on the epidurals to support or reject this name. I told my friends my name is Kane, and that went over without any problems. I was raised on an Indian reservation in the western part of America, but I left when I was 20 years old. I'm writing all of this because my attempt to flee from home was met with less than desirable results. The plane stalled mid-air and crashed into a mountain. Well, I won't elaborate on what happened to me when I was stranded in the wilderness for over 3 weeks without food, or about the wounded survivor who passed away named Jim Donner. I will only allude to the fact that it ended with me being tried for murder in court. I don't feel it necessary to expound on this. Shortly after my court hearing, my journal that I typed while awaiting trial was made public. Even though I was declared not guilty by the judicial system, the release of my journal made me into a pariah. Couldn't live in one place for too long. As soon as the people placed my name and face to the tragedy, I had to leave. Their looks of disdain and harsh words were too much for me to bear. I was, and am, a social exile. I only did what was necessary to survive, though. I believe that anyone who'd been in my situation would have done the same. No one seems willing to step up to that challenge of being without food for 3 weeks and having to eat your only friend. I received a small sum from when I pressed charges against the airlines that had put me in that fiendish situation. Once my sentiments came out, their support and funding dried up. I found myself an outcast, so I moved to New York. It was the only place where someone could be swallowed up in anonymity. I lost everything: my identity, my ability to sustain myself, and my pride. I'd once asked the gods for a new start. Unfortunately, I didn't know that the gods were cruel and sarcastic when I offered up that supplication. Yeah, I got my wishes in spades. I live my life day to day on the streets, my frostbitten deformities making begging a rather easy thing. Tips of my fingers and nose have gone black. Don't have any more sensation in them, which took some getting used to, but doesn't even faze me now. Still gaunt like a skeleton, even a year after the plane crash that resulted in my near starvation. I earn enough begging to keep myself fed. Well, it's not the healthiest situation, but it could be much worse. August 7th, 2011. I had that dream again. I'm peering into the cockpit of the place. The only part of the pilot's body that I can see is his hand. The impact crushed the cockpit. Now it looks like it imploded. His hand twitches in its death throes, but it's also beckoning. It's calling me forward like I should have died in the crash instead of surviving. I back away from the corpse and turn to flee, but the stewardess is behind me. Her ribcage is splayed open from the cart smashing into her during the crash. The ribs move and her insides pulse with every breath. Gives me the impression that the ribs are teeth that are grinding, masticating. She lurches forward, and the last thing I feel before I wake up are the bones piercing into me. I wake up with a scream in my throat. One of the benefits of living by yourself is that in moments like these, you don't have to explain yourself to anyone. I'm sweating heavily, and my throat feels raw. What disturbs me most about these dreams is the realization that they're stirring up old memories and sensations. I can almost taste the coppery sweet marrow in my mouth. It isn't an unpleasant taste, but I know that it is that taboo thought that resulted in my ostracization from the rest of society. My stomach growls at me. I lay back down and let the uncontrollable sobbing rack my body. September 1st, 2011. My nights belong to my nightmares, and my waking moments are now spent in fear. My therapist would probably chalk up the nightmares as my mind's attempt to process the horrible events. The other homeless people on the street are whispering of a gang going around abducting people, brutally beating them and leaving them in front of the police station. They say they are merciless and have been doing this for over 30 years. Witnesses are too frightened to report them to the police. They call themselves the Pluto Gang, and they are the citizens of New York afraid to go outside. They've even assaulted a semi-well-known science fiction writer. I've decided to take a fatalistic approach to the whole thing. Can't live my life in fear of the infamous Pluto Gang. There isn't much I can do to stop them if they decide to beat me to a pulp in the streets. So it goes. September 8th, 2011. The nightmares continue and are evolving. I'm in the cockpit, and the hand of the pilot beckons me to come closer. He motions me to embrace oblivion. I turn my back to him and confront Marge Reed, the stewardess. Her ribbed teeth gnash and grind at me, but she turns and disappears into the cargo hold. I begin to follow her, but another memory is standing before me. Jim Donner is grinning a fiendishly feral smirk. I want to scream and wake up, but I can't. Jim moves closer to me. He's hobbling, and each step produces a sucking sound as he puts weight on his dislocated ankle. There's a tiny shard of glass sticking from his throat, and his neck is bent at an odd angle from when I snapped it. He lunges, and the second he comes into contact with me, my world explodes in a white flash. I launch myself out of bed and wince. I rub at my cheek and it stings. I must have bitten it during my dreams. I prod the wound with my tongue. It's a small wound and it'll probably heal on its own. The taste of blood in my mouth triggers a memory. I'm kneeling over Jim's corpse and my mouth is on the wound in his neck. I'm licking and sucking at the blood trickling from the puncture. My stomach rumbles inappropriately. There's no way I'm getting back to sleep tonight. I'm going for a walk. September 25th, 2011. Went to the clinic today. I wanted a little something to supplement my begging allowance. I heard from other beggars that if you're in good shape, or at least not riddled with disease, you could get $40 or $50 for an hour of time. I waited in the lobby while the secretary stalled. I could tell she didn't like the look of me. I can't blame her. I look like I have some horrific necrotic wasting disease. When it became evident that I wasn't going to leave, she called my last name and I went into the office with the doctor. She strapped my arm down and stuck the IV in and began to filter my plasma. It wasn't until I was physically tethered to the filtration machine that I realized he was looking at me, my frostbitten fingers specifically. I tried to explain that these were injuries I suffered from after an incredibly cold winter in New York, but the doctor recognized me from the high-publicity court case. I didn't know my picture had been splashed all over the world by the media while I was awaiting trial. I thought that giving the nurse the pseudonym Jack Fiddler would be enough to deflect suspicion. When I was stuck waiting for the machine to finish separating out my plasma, the doctor grilled me about my experience during my time when I was stranded on the mountain. I gave non-committal answers. Being stuck in a frigid environment was kind of shitty. Spending 3 weeks without so much as a crumb to eat was pretty bad. It wasn't until he asked what it was like to eat another person to survive that I became agitated. I tore the IV out of my arm and stood up. I fled the clinic without receiving any money for donating plasma, but I just had to get out of there. September 29th, 2011. Got drunk today. Had no real reason for getting wasted, just wanted to. Never used to drink back when I was living on the reservation. Journal entry. Page is stained with a reddish-brown substance. The dreams are back. Well, that's not true. They never left. But I'd found myself lulled into a false sense of security by the repetitiveness of the nightmares. The beckoning hand, the savage stewardess, and Jim were now all commonplace. I'd seen them so much that it was like greeting an old and familiar dream. The dream I had last night was different. Jim appeared before me. He'd been standing in the nest of clothes that I'd made to keep us warm back then. He looked like he'd always looked in my dreams. He had the shard of glass sticking out of his throat, and the deep purple throttle marks were on his neck. He began to shamble towards me on his dislocated angle. As he got closer, I realized that he was completely covered in bite marks. Part of him had been torn away, exposing the red, sinewy muscles underneath. He shuffled up the aisle. I wanted to run away from him, but I found myself inexorably drawn towards him. A small amount of blood was dribbling from his throat, and his head lolled back and forth with every shuffling step on his broken neck. I stepped forward. Now I was only a few feet away from him. God, he smelled like rotting flesh and whiskey. He lunged, and the instant he touched me, I awoke from the dream. The memory of the taste of his flesh was fresh in my mind. My stomach wasn't growling. November 26th, 2011. The Pluto gang is at it again, so it goes. Not only have they been abducting people, but now they can add murder to their repertoire. Word has been going around that a man was recently found in an alley. He'd been brutally beaten to death. Police have been pretty tight-lipped on the whole deal, but rumors have been going around that he was being so violently stabbed and beaten that the funeral will be a closed casket affair. I don't know if it's really them or if there are copycat gangs running around using their modus operandi. But I do know that it has me on edge. The building I'm squatting in is a few blocks away from any of the other squatters. I don't play nice with the others, it would seem. They could assault me and I could scream bloody murder, and not a soul would hear me. December 24th, 2011. It's freezing here. I mean, it could be much colder. I've experienced colder weather, but I prefer not to experience it again. That's why I have a can of Sterno with me. Bought a few at a gas station. Didn't even know they made it anymore. It's lit and the flammable gel is casting off a blue flame. As long as I stay within the heat radius of it, I'll be fine on the colder nights. The gas station attendant asked me if I was going to drink it. I've seen a few of my older, more alcoholic neighbors back on the reserve strain it through a sock and drink it. They call it squeeze. It's a quick and easy way to go blind, though. I politely let him know that I was using it to fend off the cold. I wanted nothing more than to throw it in his face and set him aflame. I've been noticing lately that I've been getting agitated easily and without much provocation. January 2nd, 2012. I've had a bit of a revelation of sorts. January 3rd, 2012. Oh, I guess I need to elaborate on that. The pieces of the puzzle were before me this past month or so. It wasn't until the dream last night that I began to reassemble the puzzle, though. The quickness in which I would lose my temper, the tonal change of my dreams, the lack of hunger. I now know what's happening. I'll tell you of my dream. It began like all the other recurring dreams I'd had since the plane crash. I watched the convulsing and clutching hand of the pilot. I sidestepped the stewardess whose body was split open and masticating like a mad dog. I moved down the aisle and confronted Jim Donner. Something was different this time. It didn't end in a white flash. As soon as I touched him, I was on him, my hands wrapped around his throat as he feebly beat at me. I watched him die. I began my macabre feast. Once I'd had my fill of him, I stood up and went to the door that led to the cargo hold. Everything was so clear and prescient. I knew what was going to happen next. It was more like a memory than a dream. Well, during the trials, I couldn't remember anything during my time in the cargo hold, but now it was clear as day. The door swung open and the stench of week-old death wafted in from the inky blackness. I stripped off my jacket and makeshift gloves. I wouldn't need them anymore. I was where I belonged. The memories. I remember shoving my face into their cold abdomens and tearing at them. I buried my face into their ribs and gnawed at their hearts. It was tough to chew, but so nourishing. I had my fill of feasting on their flesh. It was difficult to chew due to the damage the cold had inflicted on their corpses. I beat and broke their bones and lapped up their marrow. It was salty and had the taste of iron. I remembered the taste of their marrow, their blood, and their flesh. I remember all of those delectable tastes. The pieces are all in place. I haven't been hungry because I've been satiating my urges. When did I become a somnambulist? Is the Pluto gang even a real thing? I know the murders aren't theirs to claim. But how long have I been sleepwalking through my nights? How many times have I woken up feeling oddly refreshed and full? I don't know how long for certain I've been giving in to my darkest desires. But I do know one thing. I'm so very hungry. The other pages have been stained a dark red and are unreadable. I set the journal down. I wanted to leave, but something was preventing me from doing so. I had some sort of unfinished business. His last journal entry was over a year ago. Could have he abandoned this place and set up another haunt? There was nothing to indicate that someone had been here. Dust and cobwebs had begun to form on everything. The thing that bothered me most was the smell. What was that smell? It was a cloying, sickly, sweet scent. I can't really describe the smell other than thinking of one time when I was a child and I ate a jar of honey and got sick. This smell brought back that memory and that feeling of upset. The smell was coming from the nearby bathroom. I wasn't sure if there was running water here anymore. At first I thought it was the smell of fetid water that had been sitting in the bathtub for months on end. My attention shifted elsewhere when I saw the writing on the wall. It, of course, wasn't metaphorical writing. I'd already read the metaphorical writing that I should have gotten the hell out of there the moment I picked up the journal. Now this was actual writing. Scrawled all over the bathroom walls and the mirror in a black felt-tip marker. When'd I go? The words overlapped each other, and the ink had begun to bleed into the plaster of the walls. What could it all mean? When'd I go? Crazy. I assumed he'd gone crazy years ago after the plane crash. When did I go? When'd I go? When did he go on his serial cannibalistic spree? When'd I go? I was missing something. Couldn't see the whole picture. When'd I go? The pieces clicked together when I said it aloud. When'd I go? Wendigo? He'd gone completely off his rocker. He thought he was a Wendigo, a cannibalistic spirit prominent in Native American legends. I didn't care about investigating the smell anymore. I wanted out. I just turned around when a voice rasped, "Oh, my feet, my burning feet of fire." It wasn't his words that startled me, but the way he spoke them. Somewhere between an inaudible noise and a whisper, but the sound of it ground into my ears like sandpaper. I think if I should live 100 years, I'll never hear another sound that instantly raised the hair on the back of my neck and made my stomach do a somersault like the sound of Blackwood talking. It sounded like this was the first time he'd spoken in months. He was just outside the bathroom, and he was waiting for me to show myself. I slowly exited and found him standing in the doorway. It, because he barely looked human now. It exhaled a rattling gasp. He was bone thin, the tips of his fingers and nose were black and necrotic. His eyes were sunken sockets in his head, and they regarded me with a feverish fervor that reflected insanity itself. The blackened skin had drawn back from his nails, and it gave him the image of having claws. He spoke like a radiator rattling a bolt around in its tubing. "Did you read my journal?" I nodded, too paralyzed by fear to speak. He paused for a moment longer than a standard blink, and then asked, "Well, did you like it?" The thing didn't give me time for an answer. He took a step forward and I edged towards the window. I knew I was on the 6th floor, but I would have rather risked falling 6 floors and splattering on the street below than staying with this fiend any longer. He saw me nervously glance at the window and grated, "Oh, I would prefer you home. I'm not a big fan of soup." He dragged his tongue across his teeth. It was then that I noticed they were decaying, but sharp. His diet of meat had worn his teeth down to look like he'd fouled them. I could smell his breath from 10 feet away. It was the same sickly saccharine smell that I'd noticed when I first entered the room. God, how long had he been watching me? He lunged across the room faster than a blink and swung a cylindrical object at my head. I would later realize that his weapon was a bone, maybe a femur, and that it had notches on it where it had been gnawed down. And it would have brained me had my body not acted on instinct. I managed to duck the swing and then fled towards the door. He threw his weapon at me while I fled and hit me square in the back. I lost my balance and smashed into the wall with my forward momentum. I managed to shake off my daze and kept running toward the stairwell. I'd later find a bruise the size of a grapefruit from this assault. What was once Canionu's Takeo, Blackwood, gave a hellish growl and proceeded to give chase. I knew that if he caught up to me, he would tear me apart and eat me. I ran down the stairs, skipping 2 steps at a time. I could hear the soft slap of his shoeless feet striking the floor as he hunted me down. I could hear him gnashing his teeth and making guttural sounds behind me. I flew down the flights of stairs and ran out into the lobby. The door was closed, and I didn't want to fumble with the knob with him so close behind me, so I lowered my shoulder and rammed it. It groaned in its frame, but didn't burst open. I frantically planted a foot and kicked it with all my might, but it still wasn't breaking open. The sound of him was getting closer by the second. I gave one last desperate kick and was instantly relieved as it blew open and revealed the street. I started forward, but something jerked me backwards. He grabbed the collar of my shirt and was pulling me back towards his gaping, rotting mouth. I was dumbfounded that such a gaunt, famished-looking man had the strength to pull me back by my collar. His rancid breath puffed on my neck, and the sensation was so revolting that I gagged. I tore at my shirt, shucked it like a snake shedding its skin, and wriggled loose. I took off down the street, away from the abandoned building. When I hazarded a look back over my shoulder, I saw him on the street. He had a strip of my shirt and had brought it to his mouth. He dragged his tongue across the shred like he could taste my fear. Then he howled in a bestial manner and returned to his lair. I didn't stop running until I was able to flag a taxi and vanish into the sea of anonymity that was New York City. Well, that was a few months ago. I went to the police, but they shrugged off my outlandish story. I can't say I blame them. Would you believe a story about a Wendigo squatting in an abandoned building and feeding his charnel cannibalistic desires? You get laughed out of the precinct if you even decided to follow up. I lied to myself and pretended that it was an elaborate prank my friends had set up and hired a makeup artist to scare the hell out of me. Oh, and I stopped my hobby of going out and exploring abandoned buildings. I told myself that lie until it became the truth to me. But I can't lie to myself anymore. I found it outside my apartment door this morning. I was getting ready to go to work for the day. I opened the door and it fell into my apartment. I picked up the book and almost pissed my pants when I recognized it as his journal. A small white object similar in shape to a bullet slid out from between the pages. It was the distal portion of a human phalange. It had been acting as the bookmark for a page. I flipped to the page and with trembling hands and quavering voice read aloud, "You never gave me feedback on my journal. We should discuss it over a bite." Primrose Mall. "Is everything ready to go?" "Yeah, my bike's ready. Got some supplies upstairs and my watch is recharged." "Excellent, my good man. See you outside your house?" "Bye," I said as I hung up, slipping the phone back into my backpack. I grabbed my helmet and bag and rushed out of my room, making sure to close my room's door behind me. Greg and I were going on what we called an adventure. That was last summer. Greg and I were 18 and 17 respectively. With this, our last summer before university, we were trying to pack it full of things to do before our schedules got more serious. We'd been friends ever since 9th grade, and man, we were an odd pair. Greg Rockwell, the klutzy big guy with a heart of gold, and I, Gabriel Vasquez, the flimsy, nervous, flamboyant one. He and I met after realizing we both liked action movies and had the same penchant for mischief. Plus, hanging around with a guy much stronger than you did wonders for the people who'd make fun of me for being delicate. But that's another matter. That day, we were headed off to Primrose Mall. Primrose Mall was considered one of the greatest business disasters in Saskatchewan, or maybe at least in our town. It opened in 1989 and stayed open for maybe a year, after which it was completely shut down. The mall was boarded up and remained an enormous, boxed eyesore on the edge of Regina City's limits. Nobody would take the land to redevelop it, but the police patrolled it pretty heavily for the first few years it was closed down, and yet Greg and I had heard they'd begun to let up on it recently. Around 5 p.m. now. I slipped upstairs and grabbed some granola bars, avoiding the eyes of my father, who was cooking something at the stove. "Well, I'm going out biking with Greg," I called out before getting out the door. "Dinner's at 6:30, my father said, as something sizzled loudly in canola oil. I headed outside where Greg was already waiting on his bike, a satchel in tow, the strap hanging over his shoulder. I waved as I rushed to retrieve my bike from the garage. And that was when old Frankie came up the street. Frank Hollister, or old Frankie, lived across the street from my family with his husband and dog. He was a quiet little man in his late 50s, who was a lot like family to my family. He always wore fine second-hand suits, his curly red hair laced with grey, a cane in his left hand. Greg was really not fond of him because Frankie had a habit of telling wild stories, but I trusted him quite a bit. "Hey, you lads going camping?" he asked in his thick Liverpool accent, gesturing to our backpacks. Greg looked away awkwardly. As I walked my bike to the curb, I said, "Yeah, Greg and I are heading down to check out Primrose Mall." Old Frankie's face suddenly froze over with concern, and after a moment of thinking, he turned to the ground and shook his head. "Oh, no. A terrible idea. Things I've heard about that mall." "Yeah, anything good?" Greg couldn't help but ask. "Well, I'm not sure what you mean by good, but, well..." Frankie looked at us both then. "The word is that it's haunted." Greg just shrugged. "Oh yeah, that was what was making me want to go." "Yeah, but it's much more than you two are prepared for." Frankie rearranged himself so he was leaning on his cane. "Went there once when the mall was open to the public, way back in the day. I always got the feeling that something was off about the place. The employees were so nice, but it was that awful forced kind of nice. You know, when people smile but their eyes aren't smiling. I bought myself some bedding at the Zeller's, got out of there, and never went back. Next thing I know, they're shutting the whole mall down. I tell you, I'm bloody glad." I glanced over at Greg, who looked entirely doubtful. After a second, I said, "We won't be there for long. We just want to explore, take some pictures, and then get out." Well, I even took some precautions. Greg fished out a little white bottle from his bag and held it out. "My mum's friends with a priest. She got this for me." "Well, that'll keep you safe, assuming the mall's not rotten to the core and the very floor you walk on collapses under you." Frankie was still disapproving. Haunted or not, it's still dangerous. I shook my head, but appreciated the concern. "Frankie, we'll be fine." "Well, look, if I don't see you two back up the lane in 2 hours, I'm telling your father where you went." "We'll be just fine," I reassured him, getting onto my bike. Old Frankie couldn't help but sigh as we began to bike off. I waved back to Frankie quickly and then turned back to face Greg. We were biking side to side. Greg had an MP3 speaker attached to the front of his bike, and he switched it on, and we biked along in a cloud of Addicted to Love. Primrose Mall was on the way out of town, so we had quite a way to go. Greg and I passed the time by pretending we were piloting Robotechs, calling out attacks and command operatives. The area towards the edge of town slowly became more and more shifty. The suburbs, full of elderly couples and families, eventually turned into hastily made brick apartment houses and little shacks. We passed a faded strip mall occupied by a Vietnamese restaurant, a sex shop, a loan office, and 2 empty storefronts. I was a little uncomfortable, but this was a bad side of town after all. The sun beat down on us, and I felt one pronounced trickle of sweat roll down my back beneath my backpack. Oh, we weren't even there yet. I already felt groggy and dirty. The big box that was Primrose Mall was quickly coming into sight, and soon enough we found ourselves just outside of the building. We stood in the parking lot, which definitely had signs of people being there recently. There were candy wrappers, beer bottles, even what looked like a used condom. Greg and I locked our bikes against a rusting, ancient bike rack, Greg stuffing his MP3 speaker into his bag. We now had to get into the mall. The thick metal door, obviously an old fire escape door, was propped up against a crumbling doorway. The hinges obviously had given out years ago. Greg and I attempted to push it aside, but the door toppled over into the dirty, patchy grass at our feet. Dusty earth rose in clouds, and Greg batted it aside helplessly while I took a step inside. We were standing in a corner of the mall, facing 2 different walkway options that would take us deeper into the structure. This part of the mall was fairly well preserved, but dirtied from where other teenagers had come and hung out. They probably hadn't attempted to go in very far. Above us was a large skylight, shaped like a hexagon and matted with dirt and mold from the outside. The area around us was thick with the smell of decay. Greg quickly took a picture of what used to be either a flower shop or a boutique. I kicked at some of the toilet paper at my feet, obviously discarded during a failed TPing. This is so far disappointing. Greg turned and picked up a dusty glass object, a discarded water bottle. Hey, Gabriel, check this out. Oh, is this a magic trick? Sure is. He hurled the bong by the neck into the wall on our left, and it exploded in a shower of glass, ash, and water. We laughed at it for a bit, but slowly, laughter turned to silent horror as we realized a portion of the wall was coming down. Greg shuffled back as a door-sized chunk of the wall, slathered in graffiti and dirt, tipped over and shattered all over the floor. A cloud of powdered dry wall rose towards us, and I began to breathe through my sleeve, shouting at Greg to do the same. The smell that filled the area was indescribable. It was beyond rotten, as if we'd just opened a grave. The stench of mold and decay surrounded us, dust settling over our hair and clothes. I shuddered at the idea of 25 years of decomposition washing over my body. When the dust cleared, the first thing we saw was a mound of rotting insulation and something else. It was black and looked like beef jerky, soaked into the insulation, maggots writhing out of the pink and black mound. I looked back at Greg in horror, and his face matched mine. Maybe we've got to move, Greg said through a hanky, hurrying forward. I followed without a word. We had two options as far as corridors were concerned. One that led to another corner of the mall that was well lit with another skylight. One that took us deeper into the structure that was plunged into total darkness. Well, we obviously chose the lit part. On the way there, Greg and I swatted drywall dust off each other as we walked. Under the second skylight were two things: the remnants of a shop and a structure Greg and I would later describe as the stairway to nowhere. The shop was surrounded in rainwater, as a variety of holes had been broken in through its ceiling, with the letters of its former sign scattered all over the floor. Most of them were damp and visibly moldy. I had no interest in the shop, but Greg snapped a picture anyway, and we turned to focus on the stairway. The stairs led to an upper platform, and then another row of stairs. And then, nothing. What do you think it could have been? I asked after a second. Well, it doesn't seem to go anywhere. Greg craned his neck around the stairs. There were no signs of what could have been behind it, but there were piles of broken, dirty shelving units and ventilation ducts. Some of the ducts even looked like they dropped from the ceiling on their own. I started to walk up the stairs, gripping the banister tightly in my right hand, but Greg tugged me back. Gabe, no, don't do it. If that wall can come down from a little bit of glass, hell knows if this thing will be able to support your weight. I'd rarely seen him so concerned. Why, you calling me fat? Oh, Gabe, come on. He gestured to the door beside the stairs. Yeah, I want to get a picture of inside this. Something feels off about it. We approached the door. Chunks of glass remained in what had been its window, and it was absolute blackness inside. At my feet was a sign that had probably been stuck to the glass ages ago, reading, "Management only." I picked it up, showing it to Greg, who considered it for a moment before taking it from me and dropping it in through the window. We didn't hear it collide with anything for a few seconds, and then, distantly below us, came a faint, wet squelch. Silence fell between us. Wide-eyed, we drew away backwards from the door, walking quickly towards the rest of the mall. Our only choice of paths was to walk straight ahead down a corridor that was once lined with shops. The floor was dusty but clean, and it was clear that we were the first people to go down there in a while. It was getting darker, but we'd each brought flashlights just in case, and flipped them out, arming ourselves. Nothing interesting was down there, though. Aiming the flashlights into the shop entryways, locked up behind security cages, we could see nothing worth worming our way into for. There were only a few shelving units and the occasional piece of discarded wood on the floor. Oh, I could have sworn I was actually starting to feel bored. Then it began to feel cold around us. At first, I didn't notice. I was wearing a flannel shirt over another shirt, but Greg, in just a t-shirt, started to rub his arms uncomfortably. He bit his lip and turned to me, asking, "Hey, you think it's because of the shades?" "What?" "The cold. Because of how shady it is in here." I was starting to feel it too. "Maybe, but doesn't it feel weird, though?" It felt damp, too. The only other time I'd felt a cold like this was one spring day at school when it was raining heavily outside, but the air conditioner was still on at full blast. It was a cold, wet, greasy feeling that made you want a hot shower. A cleansing. Greg was getting more and more irate the closer we came to the end of the corridor. "This is bullshit, Gabe," he said between shivers. And you smell that?" "Smell what?" "Don't tell me you can't smell that. It's awful. How can you not smell that?" "Smell what?" I searched the area around us for whatever was bugging him. "Oh, shit, Greg. Don't freak me out." "Well, you're the one freaking me out. How can you not smell that? And it smells like expired Marmite." He threw one thick arm towards where we'd come from. "It's worse than that broken wall out there." "Stop shouting, Greg. You're scaring me." He inhaled, a little reluctantly given whatever he smelled, and then sighed. "Okay, sorry, man. Let's figure out what to do." We were at the end of the corridor now. To our right, a dead end. What had probably been a security door was now boarded up with plywood. To our left, a piece of the outer wall was missing, next to a hallway. The hallway was smaller than the rest of the mall corridors we'd been through. I've never seen a place so devoid of light in my entire life. No security lights, no holes in the ceiling like the rest of the mall. Just nothing up ahead. A lot of light shone in through the hole in the building, letting us see one office door and a former shop down the hall, and nothing else. There could have been a flat wall painted in black ahead of us, and I wouldn't have known the difference. Oh no. I turned to look at Greg. He was taking a few steps back from the hallway, his eyes buggy, arms held out in front of himself. "No," he repeated. "There's absolutely no way I'm going down there." "Well, take a picture of it," I insisted. Something was fascinating me about the hallway. Greg flipped out his phone, took one look at it, and hissed in irritation. "Battery's dead. I could have sworn it was fully charged when I left my house." I turned to walk forward towards the hallway, curious. Greg cursed loudly and ran in front of me. "Gabe, what are you doing?" "I want to see what's down there," I said. It didn't sound right as I said it, though. I mean, the words came out in my voice, but it was strange to my ears, like I was hearing myself on a tape recorder. Greg looked back at the hall, then to me, and back and forth, dumbfounded. "The hall smells like a garbage pile. You still want to go into there?" Well, I couldn't smell anything. "Something's telling me to go in there. I swear, Greg, I'm going to be fine." That's what we told old Frankie. Look what happened with the wall. I mean, the stairs, the cold. Greg pointed at the hole in the building beside us. "We're going out through there right now." "I'm going to go into that damn hallway," I exclaimed. Greg just looked scared. I'd known him for 4 years and never had I ever seen him this scared, even when he was in trouble. He dropped to one knee and dug through his satchel, soon pulling something out. He stuffed a bottle of holy water into my hand. Take this, buddy. I'm going to be outside. If I don't see you in 10 minutes, I'm calling the cops. I swallowed hard, slipping the holy water into the flannel pocket that was over my heart. Okay, man. I'm going to be just fine. Greg pointed one thick finger at me, stern. You commit to that, okay? Okay, I said with a nod and a grin. Greg nodded back and then hurried out through the opening to the field outside. I watched him leave and turned back to the hallway and walked forward. I felt like I was stepping into a pool, plunging myself into complete darkness. I kept on walking, my hands on my backpack straps, the only sound around me, the grinding of my footsteps in drywall dust. I kept on walking, and walking, and walking. Was the hallway sloping down into the basement or something? I couldn't understand why it was taking so long for me to reach the end. I'd been expecting to reach the opposite corner of the mall by now, to turn and see light at the end of a pathway that would take me back to where we came. But I kept on walking through pitch-black darkness for what could have been 3 minutes at least. The tingle on my skin made me feel more uncomfortable than I already was. There was faint electricity in the air, and even fainter, the smell of rot, decay. Like someone back in 1989 had strewn around pieces of uncooked meat along where I was walking. I suddenly knew what agony Greg had been in back there, and regretted whatever had possessed me to come down here. What made me keep walking down that hallway with a blasé, straight face was something my father once told my sister and I. He works on films as a props master, and during one late-night filming session at an old school, he had to go to the top floor to get some tools that the crew had left. He headed upstairs alone and began to feel an awful, negative presence in the building with him, following him. He told me he'd retrieved his tools, and all the while, perfectly calm, turned around and walked down 2 flights of stairs and out of the crew truck. Because, as he said, whatever was in there wanted me to turn and run. I proved it wrong and got out just fine. He wanted to feed on his fear. Whatever was following me in that hallway wanted to feed on my fear, and I swore I'd prove it wrong too. So I kept walking and walking. I heard the faintest sound of someone exhaling. I bit my lip. Oh, my feet were starting to ache. How long had I been walking? And there wasn't a single source of light to be seen. Reluctantly, I turned back to try and see the light from the opening in the wall that Greg had gone through, hoping to see how far away I was. It was gone. I was alone and submerged in total darkness. But I had to prove it wrong. I looked back to where I was going and almost gasped. Up ahead was light pouring out of the cracks in a door. Probably found an emergency exit here. Breathing steadily, I walked up ahead until I reached the door, carefully felt around for the knob, found it, and then opened the door. What I saw left me breathless. I was now standing in Primrose Mall, brand new and in operation. I had gone back in time. The place was clean, bright, colourful, and bustling with people. A big, stupid smile spread on my face. This place was gorgeous. I quickly closed the door behind me and looked around. I'd come out of that strange door beside the stairway to nowhere, which was oddly still in its ragged, pointless state. But the messed-up shop beside it was now a shoe store. A woman with a huge perm walked by me. I tried not to stare. I was so happy to be out of the darkness. I was just about giddy. I had no idea how I'd wound up in 1989, but it was beautiful. I could smell oil from a nearby Burger King. I stopped by a clothing store's racks and could touch the clothes. I went to a vending machine and bought a Super Ball for $0.25. Well, this was no fever dream. This was real. I walked around for a bit, exploring the different shops, taking in the 80s fashions around me. Up ahead, I noticed a man coming out of a Zeller's. He was a quiet-looking little man in his mid-20s wearing a fine suit, his curly red hair shaved around the sides, a shopping bag in his left hand. The grin on my face only widened. It was old Frankie, but young. I hurried ahead to try and meet up with him. Something hit me. This was 4 years before I was even born. There wasn't any plausible way that young Frankie would know who I was. I made up a quick story in my head. I'd ask him for the time, and then maybe pretend I was new to the province and ask what shops he'd recommend around here. I stopped beside him. I hastily cleared my throat and asked, "Excuse me, sir, what time is it?" Young Frankie turned to me, smiling, and in that instant, I learned what old Frankie had meant when he mentioned that people were smiling, but that their eyes weren't smiling. Young Frankie's face was slathered in 6 or 7 chemical burns, the flesh of which puffed from his skin, crusty and frothing, in a nauseating mixture of purple, brown, and yellow. His left eye had been splashed by whatever he'd come into contact with, giving it a dull grey colour under a flat, brittle film. All the while his eyebrows were cocked, his good eye wide, and he was wearing a big, bright smile on his face. He moved his whole head to focus on me, the scarred eye never moving, his mouth slowly stretching into a wider, goofier grin. I couldn't move. He began to say something. "Yes, sir?" My voice cracked. His jaw lowered. Slowly a thick, black pudding-like liquid began to seep from his mouth, dropping into puddles on the floor. I could smell the liquid from where I was, and it wasn't unlike the smell of raw sewage. I scrambled back a few steps, then turned and bolted down the mall, my eyes searching for an exit. Up ahead was a mall cop stepping out of an office room. I shrieked at him, Sir, I need help." He turned to me, saying, "Son, what's wrong?" His face was a crater, a cave-in of purple and black scalded flesh, pus dripping down his chin and all over his shirt. I turned on my heel and kept running through the mall, searching for someone else to help, maybe even Greg if he was here. More and more people turned to look at me, smiling, each with their faces or arms scalded in different ways. I soon found the emergency exit that Greg and I had come in from. I flung it open, sending loud alarms through the mall, but disregarded them all and bolted out through the door. My joy over being freed was short-lived, though, as I realized I was now standing in a 6-by-6-foot room that looked like it was made of wet olive green rubber, with large drips and bubbles in its surface on the walls. I reached back for the door, first thinking it had locked on me, but no. It had formed shut into the wall, sealing me in. There was no way out that I could see, and the room reeked of rotting meat and something acidic. I'd thought it was rubber at first glance, but as I focused on the walls, I realized they were moving, gestating. What looked like a dripping face or a hand would occasionally try to press through the walls, each face twisted in agony as it attempted. I took a step and shrieked. There were pores in the floor, spurting some sort of translucent yellow paste when pressure was applied. It smelled not unlike Drano. It seeped in through the cloth sides of my sneakers, stinging the soles of my feet and my ankles. I clawed at the wall where the door had been, but only ragged shards of a tough, jerky-like substance came off in my hands. It was very much the same as the stuff Greg and I had found in the wall. I opened my mouth to scream, but only a dry whisper came out. I dropped to my knees and buried my face in the darkness of my arms. A moment passed, and I was moving. Was I being carried? My body was on a cot. I let my hand try and feel around. No. A stretcher. I nervously opened my eyes, finding one emergency worker at each end of the stretcher, lifting me out of the dark hallway. I let out a shaky sigh of relief, and one of the workers seemed to notice. "The boy's conscious," she said loudly. Other police officers up ahead seemed to notice, and they waved at us as we drew closer. I let my eyes fall shut, waiting as they escorted me back to the parking lot Greg and I had first been in. Everything smelled and sounded normal in the mall now. I wanted to sob. There were so many cars in the parking lot now. I could spot my mother's car, and panic shot through me again. What had old Frankie told my parents where we'd gone? How long had I been gone? Out in the sun, they put the stretcher down next to where Greg had been waiting. And to the emergency workers' surprise, I got up and stood on my own. Some of the workers were really surprised, asking me if I could or couldn't feel various parts of my body. But I felt perfectly fine. "You passed out only 4 meters down the hallway, kid," the emergency worker said again. "We've got every right to be concerned." I passed out. I couldn't process it. That's not what happened at all. I went all the way down that hallway, opened a door, and the whole mall was operational. I mean, there were people in there. Things were clean. I saw it. She sighed. It must have been a hallucination from the past contamination. My parents suddenly hurried into view, followed by an equally concerned old Frankie. My father asked, "What is this I heard about a contamination?" The contamination should be at a minimum, if any traces still remain," a bulky cop with a thick moustache said, before the emergency worker could respond. Well, I looked at Greg in horror, and he looked at me just the same. Sputtering, I asked, "Wait, contamination? What?" The cop sighed and continued. Supposedly around 85. Several hundred liters of liquid industrial waste were dumped in this lot. Crap like runoff, unused solvents, God knows what. Well, the mall was built here anyway. The provincial government claims that things were cleaned up pretty well. But what? Greg asked. Well, mall employees kept getting sick, he replied. Most of them got seriously ill or died. I wasn't working in this city at the time, but supposedly a number of people went missing around here too. Mall managers claimed that they had everything under control, though, The cops poking around the emergency door began screaming and waving at each other, which caused some of the other cops to go check out what was going on. So one officer stumbled around the side of the building and vomit. Another officer bolted up to the guy we were talking to, screaming, Preston, you won't believe this." The mustached cop looked up. "What is it?" And the guy stopped, gagging, trying to catch his breath. There are corpses sealed into the walls." "What?" "They are rotten. I must have been in there for decades." The officer nauseously waved his hands around, trying to make a shape. "Jeez, they're barely recognizable." And Greg looked right at me. "And that stuff that we saw was..." "But what about the stuff down the door by the stairway?" "Yeah, that faint squishing that we'd heard when Greg dropped the sign in." The cop whirled around to look at me then. "What stuff? What door?" The emergency worker just shook her head. It's no use talking to that one. He's still convinced he traveled back in time." "But I did," I howled, feeling humiliated. I began taking off my backpack, remembering the vending machine. I even bought something back then. It was a super bounce ball. I hastily unzipped my backpack and reached inside, feeling around for the ball. But my hand stopped, slowly recoiling from what I felt. There was a dark, greasy, stinking residue on my fingers. Breathing heavy, with the eyes of my parents, Frankie, the police and Greg all on me. I took a look into my backpack. Where my trip supplies and the ball had been were now large portions of ragged, blackened chunks of decomposing flesh. So a little bit of a question for you all at the end of tonight's video, because sometimes I just can't think of anything to say at the end of these in my little weird monologues. I don't know quite what to say sometimes. So yeah, a question. Recently I've abandoned doing the intros, then I did them again, and then I abandoned them again, and I can't quite make up my mind. A lot of people are really put off by it, and they think, oh, it's just a waste of time, and they click off the video. Other people seem to really like it. And the big problem for me is actually coming up with something wonderful, meaningful to say right at the start. So it's easier for me to do it is like it was for this one than just have a little waffle at the end. But some input from all of you would be appreciated. Well, that's about it, really. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. Always an interesting theme for me to cover. So yeah, well, all right. Till the next time, my dear friends. Podcast on the other channel tomorrow night. Back here again on Wednesday. Till then, my dear friends, you all sleep well, yeah? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.